6:15 in the morning, Hainan Island. 12 Chinese J-20 stealth fighters taxied onto the runway with live long-range missiles and a free-fire authorization. This mission was not a routine patrol. No one in the American fleet knew that the rules of engagement had just vanished. The humid air over the South China Sea was heavy. Below the clouds, the water was as smooth as dark glass. The sun was a dull orange disk on the horizon. It cast long shadows across the concrete of the Lingshui Air Base. Usually, the ground crews moved with a practiced, steady rhythm. Today, they moved with a frantic edge. They knew what was hanging from the pylons of the fighters. The lead pilot was Colonel Zhang. He sat in the cockpit of the first aircraft. He checked the seal on his flight suit. He adjusted his oxygen mask. Under the wings of his fighter, 4 PL-15 missiles were locked into place. These were not the usual training rounds with blue stripes. These were painted with the yellow bands of live high explosives. They were designed to destroy targets from 200 kilometers away. Zhang did not speak to his wingman over the radio. The squadron was operating under strict electronic silence. He pushed the throttles forward. The 2 powerful engines roared. The stealth fighter lifted into the sky. 11 more followed him in 30-second intervals. They disappeared into the low clouds. They were heading south toward the heart of the contested waters. 6:25 in the morning, the South China Sea. 300 miles away, the USS Abraham Lincoln moved through a calm ocean. The carrier was the center of a massive strike group. To the thousands of sailors on board, it felt like any other Tuesday. Men and women were drinking coffee in the mess decks. Technicians were checking the diagnostic screens on the flight deck. The morning air was cool and salty. The carrier strike group was in international waters. They were conducting a freedom of navigation transit. It was a standard operation. The American commanders expected a challenge from the Chinese Coast Guard. They expected a radio warning from a distant patrol boat. They did not expect a full squadron of stealth fighters to be screaming through the upper atmosphere at Mach 1.2. In the Combat Information Center of the carrier, the atmosphere was professional. The radar operators watched the glowing screens. Most of the contacts were commercial cargo ships. There were a few fishing boats near the Paracel Islands. The sky was empty for 100 miles around the strike group. The Aegis combat system was scanning the horizon, but the J-20 fighters were designed to be invisible. 6:35 in the morning, Colonel Zhang climbed to 40,000 feet. He looked at his tactical display. The American carrier was a bright diamond. On his passive sensor screen, he was not broadcasting a radar signal. He was a ghost in the sky. He checked his weapons master switch. He moved it to the arm position. A red light glowed in his cockpit. He had the power to start a global conflict with a single press of a button. His instructions from Central Military Commission were simple. He was to find the American formation. He was to engage if he felt the sovereignty of the sea was threatened. The definitions of sovereignty were vague. That was the danger. Zhang felt the vibration of the engines through his seat. He was focused. He was professional. He was ready to had done since the 1950s. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 6:42 in the morning. 10,000 feet over the South China Sea. A Boeing Pate Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft moved through a bank of gray clouds. Its call sign was Raven 41. For 3 hours, the crew had been scanning the water for submarine signatures. It was a tedious mission. The sensor operators in the back of the aircraft were drinking lukewarm coffee. The hum of the jet engines was a constant, steady vibration through the floor. The senior sensor operator was Petty Officer Miller. He stared at his glass display. A sharp amber line spiked on his electronic support measures screen. It was gone in less than a second. He adjusted his headset. He leaned closer to the monitor. Miller spoke into his microphone. Flight? Sensor 3. I have a momentary high-frequency emission. Bearing 320. The pilot responded immediately. Confirm. Is it a surface search radar? Negative, Miller said. His voice was flat and professional. It was a fire control pulse. Type unknown. It was too fast for the library to categorize. It felt like a door opening and closing. "Copy," the pilot said. "Keep your eyes open. We are 200 miles from the mainland. We should not be seeing fire control spikes out here." 6:46 in the morning. The spike happened again. This time, it did not disappear. It was a series of rapid pulses. It was the electronic signature of a radar system searching for a lock. Inside the patrol aircraft, the relaxed atmosphere vanished. The crew shifted in their seats. The green glow of the consoles reflected in their visors. Miller watched his screen with intensity. "Flight. Multiple contacts. I am seeing intermittent returns on the secondary array. They are high. They are very fast. I count 4. No, I count 8. They are moving at Mach 1.2. Raven 4-1 to Guardian Control," the pilot transmitted. "We have multiple high-speed contacts at 40,000 feet, bearing 320. Distance 80 nautical miles from our position. They are not squawking. I repeat, no identification, friend or foe." 6:50 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the aircraft carrier. The windowless room was filled with the low murmur of 50 sailors and the soft clicking of keyboards. Dim blue light bathed the space. In the center of the room, the tactical action officer stood behind the main display. A blue icon representing the patrol aircraft was blinking. To the northwest, small yellow symbols began to appear. Yellow meant unknown. "Track 6014, a technician called out. "Velocity is 700 knots. Altitude 42,000. Bearing constant. Classify," the officer ordered. "Sir, the signal is fragmented. It is a low observable airframe. The advanced radar system is struggling to maintain a hard track. They are flying in a tight formation. Every time they bank, we lose them." The officer looked at the screen. The yellow icons were moving directly toward the carrier strike group. They were not maneuvering. They were not responding to the automated hail signals. They were flying a direct intercept course. "Bridge. CIC," the officer said into his headset. "We have a massive inbound raid. Stealth signature. I need the Alert 5 fighters on the Cats now. We are moving to yellow alert." On the flight deck of the carrier, the quiet morning ended. Steam hissed from the catapult tracks. The heavy blast deflectors rose from the deck with a mechanical groan. 2 jet fighter aircraft were hooked to the shuttles. The pilots lowered their visors. They did not know that 40 miles away, 12 stealth fighters had already cleared their master arm switches. The radar screen in the CIC flickered. The 8 yellow icons suddenly split. The computer recalculated the count. "Sir," the technician whispered, "it is not 8 aircraft, it is 12. The room went silent. 12 stealth fighters was not an intercept. It was a strike package. 6:55 in the morning. The guided missile destroyer, USS Halsey. The ship was 3 miles ahead of the carrier. It was the primary sensor for the strike group. Inside the Combat Information Center, the air smelled like ozone and recycled oxygen. The air warfare commander was a lieutenant commander named Sarah Vance. She stared at the Aegis display. The yellow icons for the Chinese fighters were flickering. They were ghosts. "Halsey, track is intermittent," the technician reported. "They are using terrain masking even at 40,000 feet. They are banking to minimize their radar cross-section." "Give me a firing solution," Vance ordered. "Ma'am, I cannot get a hard lock. The system is rejecting the data." On the bridge of the Halsey, the captain looked through his binoculars at the empty horizon. To the south, the USS Howard was turning. Both destroyers were repositioning. They were putting their most powerful radars toward the threat. They were prepared to fire their surface-to-air missiles at a target they could barely see. 7 o'clock in the morning. Inside the cockpit of the lead J-20, Colonel Zhang saw the American destroyers on his data link. His sensors were passive. He was not sending out a single electronic pulse. He was receiving data from a high-altitude drone flying 500 miles away. The drone saw the American ships clearly. Zhang looked at the countdown on his glass display. He was 4 minutes from the edge of the American missile engagement zone. His hand was steady on the control stick. His breathing was slow and rhythmic. Behind him, his 11 wingmen maintained a perfect formation. They were flying in a staggered wedge. It was a configuration designed to overwhelm a defense system. If they fired now, dozens of missiles would saturate the American air defenses. Formation. Prepare to cycle weapons bays, Zhang commanded through the encrypted data link. No voice was used, only a digital signal. The internal doors on the belly of 12 stealth fighters began to move. This was a critical moment. For a few seconds, the planes would no longer be stealthy. They would be visible to every radar in the region. 7:02 in the morning. The flight deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln. The first F-18 Super Hornet sat on catapult number 1. The pilot was Commander Ryan Jacks. His call sign was Cobra 11. He watched the yellow shirt officer on the deck. The officer signaled for full afterburner. The engines of the Super Hornet screamed. White steam billowed across the deck. With a violent jolt, the catapult fired. The fighter was launched from 0 to 150 miles per hour in 2 seconds. Jacks felt the heavy pressure of the gravity force. He retracted his landing gear and banked hard to the northwest. Cobra 11. Airborne, Jacks said into his radio. Guardian. Cobra 11. The controller responded. You have 12 hostile contacts. Bearing 320. Range 60 miles. You are authorized to intercept. Do not fire unless fired upon. Jacks looked at his radar. For the first time, he saw the signatures. They were massive. The J-20s had opened their weapons bays. They were no longer hiding. They were showing their teeth. Guardian, Jacks said. His voice was tight. They are hot. I repeat, the bandits are flying with open bays. This is not a tactical intercept. They are in a strike profile. The sky was no longer empty. It was becoming a very crowded place. The radar screen in the CIC flickered. The 8 yellow icons suddenly split. The computer recalculated the count. Sir, the technician whispered, it is not 8 aircraft. It is 12. The room went silent. 12 stealth fighters was not an intercept. It was a strike package. 7:10 in the morning, 40 miles northwest of the American carrier. Commander Jacks leveled his Super Hornet at 35,000 feet. His wingman, Cobra 12, was stepped up and 500 meters to his right. The air was perfectly clear. The horizon was a sharp line where the deep blue of the sky met the lighter blue of the ocean. Jacks looked through his canopy. Far to the northwest, he saw them. 12 silver-gray shapes were etched against the pale morning light. They were not maneuvering to avoid him. They were flying a rock-steady course. They looked like jagged diamonds suspended in the air. The pilot spoke into his radio. Guardian, Cobra 11. Visual contact. 12 J-20 fighters. They are in a 3x4 wedge formation. Weapons bays are open. I repeat. Internal weapons bays are cycled open. We are being targeted by passive sensors. The controller responded from the carrier. Copy, Cobra 11. You are shadowed by 4 additional aircraft launching now. Do not engage. Maintain a 5-mile buffer. Do not cross their nose. 5 miles is too close, Jack said. His voice was strained by the pressure of his G-suit. They are already inside our minimum abort range. If they launch, we have no room to maneuver. 7:12 in the morning. Inside the lead J-20 fighter, Colonel Zhang watched the 2 American jets approach from his 10 o'clock position. He saw the white contrails of the Super Hornets as they banked to parallel his course. His helmet-mounted display projected a green box around the lead American fighter. A low-frequency warning tone chirped in his ears. The American fighters were not locking their fire control radars. They were using infrared search and track systems to follow him. It was a disciplined, professional move. It avoided an immediate electronic provocation while still maintaining a lethal solution. Zhang spoke to his formation through the digital data link. Maintain course. Do not react to the interceptors. Keep the weapons bays in the cycle position. Prepare for the final approach to the carrier group. He looked out his left window. One of the Super Hornets was now only 3 miles away. He could see the dark shape of the pilot in the cockpit. He could see the lethal gray shapes of the Sidewinder and AMRAAM missiles tucked under the American wings. Every weapon was live. Every pilot had their finger near the trigger. 7:15 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln. The room was a pressure cooker of controlled silence. The admiral stood next to the tactical action officer. On the main wall screen, the distance between the two formations was shrinking. The numbers were glowing in red. The admiral asked a question. "Status of the Aegis lock?" The officer responded, "Sir, Halsey and Howard have a firm track. The destroyers are ready to engage, but the Chinese fighters are not painting us with active radar. They are flying electronically silent. If we fire now, we are the ones starting the war. They have their weapons bays open," the admiral said. "In any other scenario, that is an overt act of hostility. They are 1 minute from their optimal launch point." "Confirm," the officer said. "They are 60 seconds from the release window for their long-range missiles. If they fire 12 aircraft at once, our screen will be overwhelmed. The destroyers will have less than 40 seconds to intercept the incoming rounds." The admiral looked at the screen. 12 yellow icons, 2 blue icons. The space between them was disappearing. The tension in the room was a physical weight. No one moved, no one spoke. The two formations were now less than 20 miles from the carrier. The time for talking was almost over. 7:16 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln. The admiral leaned over the tactical console. His face was a mask of hard concentration. The yellow icons for the J-20 fighters were now less than 15 miles away. This was the inner edge of the carrier defense zone. At this range, a missile launch would leave the American ships with only seconds to react. "Admiral, Halsey is requesting permission to illuminate the targets," the weapons officer reported. To illuminate meant to hit the Chinese planes with a high-powered tracking radar. It was the final step before firing a surface-to-air missile. It was a clear warning. It was also an act that could trigger a lethal reflex. "Hold," the admiral said. "If we paint them, they might fire. If they fire, we lose ships. We are not going to be the ones to pull the trigger first, sir." "They are at the release point," the officer countered. His voice was steady but urgent. "They are within the optimal kill envelope for their missiles." "Wait," the admiral repeated. "Watch their wings. Watch their bays. If they twitch, we engage every battery we have." 7:18 in the morning. Inside the lead J-20, Colonel Zhang felt the heat of the electronics in his cramped cockpit. His multi-function display showed the American carrier. It was a massive gray shape on the water, centered in a red targeting box. The range was decreasing, 12 nautical miles. 11. He looked to his right. His wingman was a silent shadow in the morning light. Neither pilot spoke. They were bound by the orders of the Central Military Commission. They were to push the Americans to the absolute limit. They were to demonstrate that the South China Sea was no longer a safe place for a foreign fleet. Zhang placed his thumb on the weapon release button. He did not press it. He waited for the specific coordinate in the sky. The pressure in the cockpit was intense. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic hiss of his oxygen system. He was a professional. He was a weapon. He was waiting for the final command. 7:20 in the morning. 10 miles from the carrier, Commander Jax flew his Super Hornet, just 2,000 feet away from the lead Chinese fighter. He was so close, he could see the individual rivets on the gray skin of the J-20. He looked down and saw the internal structure of the open weapons bay. The sleek white shapes of the long-range missiles were visible. They were ready to drop into the slipstream. Guardian. Cobra 1-1. Jax transmitted. The lead bandit is rock steady. He is not responding to my wing dips. He is ignoring my presence entirely. He is focused on the carrier. He is not deviating from the attack profile. Copy. Cobra 1-1, the controller said. Stay with him. Do not cross the line. Do not initiate contact. Jax gripped the control stick. His knuckles were white inside his flight gloves. He watched the J-20 with a predatory focus. He watched for the smallest movement of a control surface. He watched for the flicker of a missile motor. The two formations were now so close that the sailors on the deck of the carrier could see the glint of the Chinese jets in the morning sky. The roar of 24 jet engines echoed across the water. It was a standoff between the two most powerful militaries on Earth. Both sides had committed their pride. Both sides had committed their steel. The silence on the radio was absolute. Every second felt like an hour. The line was about to be crossed. Both sides were committed to a course that could only end in fire. 7:21 in the morning. 8 miles from the carrier. The American carrier strike group was fully illuminated. Every radar on every ship was now active. The sky was saturated with invisible energy. On the deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the sailors in the observation galleries held their breath. They could see the 12 silver specks. They were growing larger. They were moving at 900 feet per second. Inside the Combat Information Center, the Air Warfare Commander shouted, "Targeting lock detected. The lead bandit is painting the bridge with a laser designator. Sir, we are being targeted for a precision strike." The Admiral gripped the edge of the console. Status of the phalanx systems. All close-in weapons systems are in auto-engage mode. The officer replied, "The Gatling guns are tracking. The Sea Sparrow missiles are armed. If they cross the 5-mile line, the computers will fire automatically." 7:21 and 30 seconds. Commander Jax saw the change first. The lead J-20 did not fire a missile. Instead, it did. Something unexpected. The silver fighter suddenly rolled onto its back. It pulled a hard, high-gravity maneuver. The nose of the aircraft pointed straight down toward the flight deck of the carrier. Cobra 1-1. "Braking," Jax yelled. "The lead is diving. He is diving on the deck. He is coming in hot." Jax pulled his stick back. He tried to follow the maneuver. His G-suit inflated with a violent hiss. It crushed his legs to keep the blood in his brain. The world turned gray at the edges of his vision. The Chinese pilot was moving with incredible speed. It was a suicide run or a terrifying game of chicken. 7:22 in the morning. 6 miles out. Colonel Zhang felt the twint, heavy weight of the dive. His internal organs were being pushed toward the floor of his cockpit. He watched the massive gray deck of the carrier grow in his heads-up display. He could see the individual aircraft parked on the stern. He could see the tiny white figures of the deck crew scattering for cover. His finger was still on the trigger. The red box was locked on the carrier island. He was 4 seconds from the release point for a short-range strike. His wingmen remained high. They were providing cover. They were waiting for his signal to follow him into the fire. Zhang saw the American destroyer USS Halsey below him. The ship was turning hard. Its gun turret was tracking his flight path. He knew the American computers were milliseconds away from firing. He was at the edge of the abyss. 7:22 and 30 seconds. Target is at 4 miles. The American weapons officer screamed. "Permission to engage. Admiral. Permission to engage." The Admiral stared at the screen. The J-20 was a blur of silver. It was dropping through 5,000 feet. It was aiming for the center of the ship. The noise was a physical force. The carrier was vibrating from the sound of the approaching jet. The Admiral looked at the tactical display. He saw something the computers did not prioritize. The Chinese pilot had not closed his weapons bay. He was still flying with his doors open, but he had not launched. "Hold your fire," the Admiral commanded. "Sir, he is going to hit us," the officer shouted. "Hold your fire," the Admiral repeated. 7:23 in the fire, morning. 2 miles out. The J-20 was now so close that the roar of its engines drowned out every other sound on the carrier. It was a wall of noise that shook the glass in the bridge windows. The pilot was staring down the throat of the American defense. Jax was right behind him, his own weapons locked on the Chinese jet. The world seemed to slow down. 100,000 tons of steel met one pilot in a stealth fighter. The trigger was a fraction of an inch from being pulled. The destiny of 2 nations hung on the nerve of 1 man. 7:24 in the morning, 1 mile from the carrier island. Colonel Zhang pulled the control stick back with a violent, precise motion. The nose of the J-20 pitched up. The stealth fighter clawed at the air. It cleared the top of the carrier tower by less than 500 feet. The roar of the engines was a physical blow to the sailors on the bridge. The glass in the windows rattled in its frames. On the flight deck, the wind from the jet wash knocked a maintenance cart over. The smell of burnt JP-8 fuel filled the air. The American crew watched as the silver shape of the fighter leveled off at 3,000 feet. It did not accelerate away. It did not climb back to the safety of the clouds. Zhang banked his aircraft into a shallow left turn. He was moving at exactly 300 knots. He was maintaining a perfect distance from the center of the American formation. He was beginning a circle. Inside the Combat Information Center, the Admiral stood paralyzed. The red icons on the screen were still there. The threat had not ended. It had simply changed its shape. "Report," the Admiral barked. "Sir, he is not disengaging," the tracking officer said. His voice was trembling. "He is orbiting the ship. 1 aircraft is low. 11 are still high. Weapons bays on all 12 are still open. We are still under a hard lock." 7:25 in the morning. Commander Jax pulled his Super Hornet into a tight turn to stay behind the Chinese lead. He was confused. In 15 years of flying, he had never seen a maneuver like this. It was not a tactical move. It was a parade maneuver performed in the middle of a combat zone. "Guardian, Cobra 1-1. Jax transmitted. The lead bandit has completed his first orbit. He is starting a second circle. He is flying with total precision. He is not looking at me. He is not reacting to my wingman. He is just circling." "Copy, Cobra," the controller said. "Maintain your position. Do not interfere with his flight path. We are watching from the bridge. It is like he is drawing a line in the sky." 7:27 in the morning. Colonel Zhang completed the second circle. He checked his fuel state. He checked the position of his wingmen. He felt a strange sense of calm. He was no longer a pilot in a machine. He was a symbol of a rising power. He was showing the Americans that he could enter their house, walk through their rooms, and leave whenever he chose. He looked down at the carrier. The deck was a hive of activity. He saw the white smoke of the catapults as more American fighters were launched. It did not matter. He had already won the psychological battle. He had reached the heart of the fleet without a single shot being fired. He began the third circle. His flight path was a perfect mathematical ring around the USS Abraham Lincoln. It was an insult disguised as a maneuver. He was proving that the American defenses were a suggestion, not a wall. 7:28 in the morning. The bridge of the carrier. The captain looked at the admiral. What is he doing? Is this a countdown? Is he waiting for a signal to fire? No, the admiral said. He was watching the J-20 through his binoculars. He is not waiting. He is speaking. He is telling us that he owns this water. He is telling us that our presence here is tolerated, not required. The admiral looked at the radar display. The Chinese pilot was halfway through his fourth circle. The flight geometry was flawless. It was a display of airmanship that bordered on the impossible given the tension of the moment. 7:29 in the morning. The J-20 finished the fourth circle. It leveled its wings and pointed its nose toward the north. For the first time in 10 minutes, Colonel Zhang spoke. He did not use the radio. He sent a single digital burst to his squadron. Formation. Close weapons bays. Climb to 50,000 feet. We are going home. The silver doors on the bellies of 12 stealth fighters snapped shut. The radar signatures on the American screens suddenly flickered and grew small. The ghosts were preparing to vanish. The air on the carrier was still thick with the smell of jet fuel. No weapons had been fired, no ships were lost, but the silence that followed was more terrifying than the roar of the engines. The mystery of the four circles had just begun. 7:30 in the morning, north of the carrier strike group. Colonel Zhang pulled back on the side stick of his J-20. He felt the heavy pressure of the G-suit against his thighs. The 12 stealth fighters moved as a single entity. They transitioned from a low-altitude orbit to a steep, high-speed climb. The silver bellies of the aircraft glinted in the sunlight. Behind them, the massive gray deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln began to shrink. It looked like a small toy floating on a vast blue sheet. Zhang looked at his tactical display. The American Super Hornets were still there. They were climbing with him, staying 5 miles to the east. He could see their heat signatures on his infrared sensor. They were no longer a threat. They were a funeral escort. He sent a digital command to his wingmen. Formation. Increase speed to Mach 1.4. Maintain vertical separation of 1,000 feet. The 12 fighters accelerated. The roar of 24 engines created a sonic boom that echoed across the empty ocean. They were leaving the scene of a crime that had not been committed. They were withdrawing in perfect order. There was no chatter. There was no celebration. In the Chinese cockpits, the pilots remained as silent as the machines they flew. 7:34 in the morning. Inside the cockpit of Cobra 11, Commander Jax adjusted his oxygen mask. He watched the Chinese formation pull away. His own engines were at full military power, but the J-20s were faster. They were climbing through 40,000 feet and still accelerating. The gap between the two groups of fighters was widening. Jax spoke into his radio. Guardian, Cobra 11. The bandits are egressing. They are heading 350. Altitude 48,000 and climbing. They are outpacing us. The controller on the carrier responded. Copy, Cobra. Do not pursue. Maintain cap station at 30,000 feet. We are transitioning to a defensive posture. Return to the carrier for recovery when your fuel state reaches bingo. Jax looked at the empty space where the lead Chinese fighter had been. He felt a cold sensation in his chest. It was not fear. It was a profound sense of vulnerability. He had spent his entire career believing in the technical superiority of his aircraft and his training. In 10 minutes, that belief had been systematically dismantled. The Chinese had not just intercepted them. They had toyed with them. 7:37 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln. The blue-lit room remained tense. The yellow icons on the main screen were moving rapidly toward the north. They were crossing the 100-mile line. The immediate danger of a missile strike was fading, but the psychological weight was growing. A junior officer spoke up. Sir, they are back on their original flight path. It is like they never left it. The admiral did not answer. He was staring at the recording of the 4 circles. The computer was playing back the flight telemetry of the lead J-20. The loops were so precise, they looked like they had been drawn with a compass. They were showing us their flight control software. The admiral whispered to the captain. That was not just a pilot flying a plane. That was an autonomous flight system demonstrating a zero-error threshold. They wanted us to see that they cannot make a mistake. And the weapons bays? The captain asked. A reminder, the admiral said. They showed us the missiles to tell us they could have fired. They circled us to tell us they did not need to. It was a demonstration of absolute control. 7:40 in the morning. The 12 Chinese fighters disappeared from the American radar screens. They had climbed to 52,000 feet, entering a layer of the atmosphere where the Aegis system struggled to maintain a track on stealth targets. The sky was once again empty. On the deck of the carrier, the crews began the process of recovering the aircraft. The tension was slowly replaced by a grim professionalism. Men and women moved with mechanical efficiency. But they did not speak. They looked at the horizon. They looked at the spot in the air where the silver ghosts had circled. The withdrawal was complete. The J-20 squadron was heading back to Hainan Island. But the American fleet was no longer the same. The silence was heavy. It was the silence of a man who had just realized he was being watched from the shadows. 7:45 in the morning. 80 miles north of the carrier strike group, the Chinese stealth fighters were gone. They were ghosts once more. But the electronic wake they left behind was chaotic. The American destroyers were still broadcasting high-energy radar pulses. The air was thick with the invisible noise of electronic warfare. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the tension had not dissipated. It had curdled into a dangerous, twitchy alertness. New contact. Track 7120. A sensor operator called out. Her voice was sharp, bearing 350. Range 60 miles. Altitude 12,000 feet. The tactical action officer pivoted to the screen. Is it a return from the J-20 formation? Negative, sir. The radar cross-section is too large. It is moving slowly. 300 knots. It is squawking a civilian transponder code, but the global positioning system coordinates are drifting. 7:48 in the morning. The contact was flying directly down the path the Chinese fighters had used for their retreat. In the high-stress environment of a near-combat encounter, this was a classic signature of a decoy or a Trojan horse. The American crews were primed for a secondary strike. They were looking for a reason to defend themselves. Halsey. Guardian. The controller transmitted. Do you have a firm lock on track 7120? Guardian. Halsey. The destroyer responded. We have a solid track. The target is non-responsive to automated hails. It is deviating from the standard commercial air corridor. Weapon systems are slave to the target. We are 30 seconds from the engagement envelope. On the bridge of the Halsey, the fire control officer held the launch key. He was looking at a green circle on his screen. If he turned the key, a Standard Missile 2 would leap from the vertical launch cells. It would destroy the target in less than 20 seconds. After the humiliation of the 4 circles, the American defenders were not in the mood for another mystery. 7:51 in the morning. Commander Jax was still airborne in his Super Hornet. He was low on fuel, but he was the closest asset to the new contact. He banked his fighter toward the coordinates. Cobra 1-1. I am moving to intercept track 7120, Jax said. I will provide a visual identification. Hold your fire. I repeat, hold your fire until I have eyes on. Jax pushed his throttles forward. He squinted against the bright morning sun. He saw a white speck against the blue water. As he closed the distance, the shape became clear. It was not a stealth fighter. It was not a drone. It was a twin-engine turboprop. It was an ATR-72 commercial airliner with the bright orange and yellow markings of a regional carrier. Guardian. Cobra 1-1, Jax reported. His voice was flooded with relief. The contact is a civilian regional flight. I can see the windows. It looks like a scheduled hop from Manila. They must be having navigation issues, probably due to the heavy jamming in the area. 7:53 in the morning. Inside the carrier, the red lights on the weapons consoles flickered back to green. The threat was downgraded. The Trojan horses was just a group of tourists and business travelers who had no idea they had been seconds away from being vaporized by a billion-dollar air defense system. Copy Cobra, the controller said. Guide them back to the corridor, then return for recovery. The deck is clear. 7:55 in the morning. The crisis within the crisis was over. The civilian plane corrected its course and droned away toward the horizon. But the incident proved how thin the margin for error had become. The Chinese maneuver had not just challenged the fleet, it had degraded the judgment of the humans operating the machines. The admiral sat down in his command chair. He rubbed his eyes. The morning was not yet 2 hours old. The sky was blue, the water was calm, but the South China Sea felt like a minefield. Begin the stand down to yellow alert, the admiral ordered. I want a full debrief for the defense headquarters facility ready in 1 hour. Tell them we were tested. And tell them the test isn't over. 8 o'clock in the morning. The flight deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln. The heavy sound of a jet engine filled the air. As Commander Jax brought his Super Hornet in for a landing, the tail hook of his aircraft caught the third wire with a violent, metallic jerk. The fighter slammed into the steel deck and came to a sudden halt. Jax sat in the cockpit for a long minute. He did not move. He felt the sweat cooling on his neck. His heart rate was finally beginning to slow. Around the aircraft, the deck crews moved in their colored jerseys. The grapes began the refueling process. The brown shirts checked the airframe for stress. It was a routine they had performed thousands of times. But today, the movements were stiff. There was no joking. There was no celebratory thumbs up. Every sailor on the deck had seen the silver ghosts circling the ship. They knew how close they had come to the end of their world. Jax opened his canopy. The humid sea air rushed into the cockpit. He climbed down the ladder and stood on the non-skid surface of the deck. His legs felt heavy. He looked at his wingman. who was just shutting down his own engines. They did not speak, they simply nodded to each other. There were no words for what had just happened in the sky. 8:10 in the morning, Lingshui Air Base, Hainan Island. The lead J-20 touched its wheels to the concrete runway. Colonel Zhang deployed the drag chute. The white fabric blossomed behind the fighter, slowing it down as it taxied toward the hardened hangars. One by one, the other 11 fighters followed. They moved like a silent procession of predators returning to their den. Zhang brought his aircraft to a stop inside the shaded hangar. He shut down the twin engines. The high-pitched whine faded, replaced by the sound of the tropical wind outside. He pulled off his flight helmet and wiped his forehead. His face was a mask of professional exhaustion. He had been in the air for less than 2 hours. It felt like 10 years. A ground crew officer approached the ladder. He stood at attention as Zhang climbed down. "The mission is complete, Colonel," the officer said. "The command is waiting for your digital logs." "The logs are ready," Zhang replied. His voice was raspy from the oxygen mask. "The mission was a success. We demonstrated the capability. Now the diplomats will have to do the rest." Zhang walked toward the debriefing room. He did not look back at his plane. He was already thinking about the next flight. He knew that the Americans would be changing their tactics by tomorrow morning. The game of cat and mouse had just entered a new, more dangerous phase. 8:15 in the morning, the South China Sea. The USS Halsey and the USS Howard transitioned from battle stations to a standard patrol posture. The high-energy search radars were dialed back to their normal surveillance modes. The missile bay doors remained closed. On the horizon, the Chinese naval vessels that had been shadowing the group were also turning away. In the Combat Information Center of the carrier, the Admiral watched the screen. The yellow icons of the Chinese fighters had disappeared from the long-range scan. They were back on the ground. The immediate threat was gone. The ocean was quiet again, but the Admiral knew the quiet was an illusion. "Signal the strike group," the Admiral said to his communications officer. "We are maintaining our scheduled course. We will not deviate. But I want the Alert 5 pilots in their cockpits until we are out of this sector. No one sleeps today. No one sleeps today." The Admiral looked at the digital clock on the wall. The crisis had lasted less than an hour. It had been a tactical stalemate, but a strategic earthquake. The data from the encounter was already being encrypted and sent to the Defense Headquarters facility. Thousands of miles away, analysts were waking up to a new reality. The ships moved forward through the blue water. The sun was high in the sky now. The morning was over, but the shadow of the 4 circles remained over the fleet. 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. 1,000 miles from the carrier, the air was still and the sun was bright. Inside the windowless vault of the Joint Intelligence Center, the atmosphere was cold. A dozen analysts sat in front of high-resolution monitors. They were reviewing the raw telemetry from the encounter. The flight path of the lead J-20 was projected onto a massive glass wall. A senior analyst named Captain Miller pointed at the screen. "Look at the telemetry from the Halsey. Look at the orbital radius of the lead aircraft." The data showed 4 perfect circles. They were not just close to each other. They were identical. The altitude did not vary by more than 12 inches. The speed was constant to the 4th decimal point. Miller spoke to the room. "No human pilot can fly this, not even with the best fly-by-wire systems in the world. This is a demonstration of autonomous swarm logic." The lead pilot was not holding the stick. He was supervising a tactical algorithm. An officer in the back of the room asked a question. "What is the significance of the 4 circles?" "It is not a maneuver," Miller replied. "It is a mathematical signature. Look at the coordinates of the center point of each circle. When you connect them, they form the exact perimeter of the carrier's primary radar dead zone. They were showing us that they have mapped our electronic blind spots. They were flying through the one place our automated interceptors cannot effectively track." 10 o'clock at night. The Pentagon, Washington District of Columbia. The building was nearly empty, but the lights in the Situation Room were burning. The Secretary of Defense sat at the head of a long table. He looked at a printed report. The words "Top Secret" were stamped in red on every page. Across from him, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff leaned forward. The secretary spoke. The Chinese are calling it a routine training exercise. They issued a statement saying their pilots exercised extreme restraint in the face of American provocation. The chairman shook his head. They were not being restrained. They were being precise. They didn't fire a single shot, but they effectively neutralized the carrier strike group for 10 minutes. If those 12 jets had launched their missiles from those specific orbital points, our survival probability would have been less than 10%. What is the recommendation? The secretary asked. We need to move the fleet, the chairman said. Not away, but we need to change how we operate. The old rules of engagement are dead. They proved they can get inside our decision loop. They showed us they can walk right up to the door and knock. If we don't adapt, the next time, they won't just circle. 2 days later, over the South China Sea, the USS Abraham Lincoln was 300 miles east of its original position. The carrier was moving toward the Philippine Sea. The deck was still busy. Fighters were still launching, but the mood had shifted. The crew was no longer just going through the motions. They were looking at the sky. They were looking for the silver ghosts that had defined their week. In the ready room, Commander Jax sat with his squadron. They were watching the footage of the intercept. They were looking for mistakes. They were looking for a way to beat a machine that didn't make errors. Jax stood up and addressed his pilots. They gave us a gift. They showed us their hand. They think we are slow. They think we are predictable. They think we are predictable. Our job is to prove they are wrong. We are going back up in 20 minutes. We are going to practice the offset intercept. We are going to practice the offset intercept. If they want to draw circles, we are going to find a way to break them. The geopolitical fallout was just beginning. In Beijing, the lead pilot was being awarded a medal in a private ceremony. In Washington, the budget for autonomous flight systems was being doubled. The encounter was being analyzed in every capital in the world. Everyone understood the truth. The nature of warfare had changed in the time it took to fly 4 slow circles. 3 days later, the Pentagon, Washington District of Columbia. The final report on the Ling Shui incident was delivered to the Oval Office in a single leather-bound folder. It did not contain photographs of explosions or lists of casualties. Instead, it contained a series of mathematical proofs. The strategic assessment was clear. The 12 J-20 fighters had not conducted a raid. They had conducted a digital execution of the American defensive doctrine. Military analysts concluded that the 4 circles were a form of geometric signaling. In the world of high-stakes signaling, words are often secondary to actions. By flying those precise orbits, the Chinese military demonstrated 3 things. First, they possessed flight control software that could operate with 0% deviation. Second, they had identified every gap in the Aegis radar coverage of a carrier strike group. Third, and most importantly, they had the discipline to reach the point of no return and then choose to step back. This was the new face of great power competition. It was a war of nerves played out at Mach 1.4. It was a conflict where the primary weapon was not a missile, but the psychological certainty of one's own capability. 10:15 in the morning. The South China Sea. The USS Abraham Lincoln moved through the Luzon Strait. The carrier was heading toward the open waters of the Pacific. The tactical situation had returned to a state of uneasy equilibrium. To an outside observer, nothing had changed. The ships were in the same ocean. The planes were in the same sky. But the internal logic of the region had been rewritten. The American pilots now flew with a different mindset. They no longer assumed their stealth was a shield. They no longer assumed their technology was a generation ahead. They practiced new maneuvers. They developed new ways to counter the autonomous logic they had witnessed. They were adapting to a world where the enemy was not just a man in a cockpit, but a ghost in the machine. In Beijing, the mission was viewed as a masterclass in gray zone operations. They had achieved a strategic victory without a single drop of fuel being wasted in a dogfight. They had forced the most powerful navy on Earth to reassess its position. The 12 pilots of the Ling Shui squadron returned to their standard duties. They did not talk about the mission. They did not need to. The data they gathered was already being integrated into the next generation of combat algorithms. Modern warfare is often defined by the moments of maximum violence. But as the analysts in Washington and Beijing both realized, the most significant moments are often the quietest. The 4 circles around the carrier were a silent scream. They were a warning that the era of uncontested dominance was over. The ocean is vast and indifferent to the machines that move across its surface. The waves erase the wake of a carrier in minutes. The wind disperses the contrails of a fighter in seconds, but the memory of that morning remains etched into the time. Digital brains of the sensors and the human brains of the crews. The ultimate lesson of the incident was one of restraint. In a world of automated weapons and hypersonic speeds, the most advanced capability is the ability to stop. Both sides had looked into the abyss. Both sides had seen the potential for a global catastrophe, and both sides had chosen to turn away. History is decided not by the who fires first, but by who chooses not to fire at all. The sky over the South China Sea was blue and empty once more. The sun climbed toward the noon position. The 4 circles were gone from the radar, but they would remain in the tactical manuals for decades to come. The line had been drawn. The message had been sent. The world was still at peace, but it was a peace defined by the geometry of a threat.